Okay, good morning. So we are doing today based on base in Taanit. Gemara tells us we're up to the two dots on the top of the page. Remember the Mishnah? The Mishnah had told us that according to Belezer, when do we start saying Mashav Aruach? We start saying Miyantav Harishon Shalchag, which is the first day of Sukkot. Rabbi Shua disagreed. Rabbi Shua said that when do we say Mashav Aruach? We say it on the Yantav Achron Shalchag. We say it on the last day of the Yantav. Today we're going to explore more of the Shita of Rabbi Lezer. So again, the two dots, 5 lines down. Rabbi Lezer Emer, Yontav Harishon Shalchag. When you start saying Mashav Ruach, you start saying it on the first day of Sukkot. The Gemara, Ibailhu, Gemara asks a question on Rabbi Lezer. Ibailhu, Rabbi Lezer, Mehecha Gamerla. Where did Rabbi Lezer learn this idea that you're supposed to say Mashav Ruach Marna Geshem on the first day of Sukkot? Milulav Gamarla. Did he learn it out from Lulav, from the mitzvah of the Arba Minim, or did he learn it out from the mitzvah of Nisach Hamayim? So again, which one? In other words, the Gemara is assuming that both Lulav and Nisach Hamayim could teach me that you say Mashav Baruch on the first day. As we're going to go through this, we'll have to get a little bit more subtle as to what we mean. It's not just simply the first day. Could be there's other nafkaminas here, but for our purposes now, if we learned out either from the Dal Minim or we learned it out from Nisach Hamayim, we could learn out Mashav Baruch is to be said on the first day of Sukkot. Says the Gemara. I think that Milulav Gamala, we can say that he learned it out from Lulav. Why? Ma Lulav Bayayim, Av Haskar Bayayim. Because just like by Lulav, when do you neitel the Arba Minim? You do it by day. So too, just like you do the mitzvah of the Arba Minim by day, so too, Av Haskar Bayayim. So too, you start saying Mashav Baruch only by day. You don't say Mashav Baruch at night of Sukkot. You say it by day. Dilma. Or maybe we could say, Nisach Hamayim Gamallah. He's really learning out from Nisach Hamayim. And what about Nisach Hamayim? Ma Nisach Hamayim Me'orta. Just like Nisach Hamayim has the ability to have some connection to the evening of Sukkot, the first night. Amar Mar M'chasam and Iskam Afilu Balayla. Because it says in Pasuk, the Amar Mar, if you look on the side, has a different girsa. It could be Rabbi Abba, it could be Rabbi Marchama, it could be Rabbi Yechon, whoever it is. Just like they said that M'chasam and Iskam is learned that you could do even Nisach Hamayim even by night. So then Af Haskar Me Orta. Then you could do even the Haskara of Mashav Ruach, you would do it at night as well. So again, the Gemara started out by saying, okay, we know from the Mishnah that Belezer holds that you're maskir Gres Kisham, you start saying Mashav Ruach on the first day of Sukkot. What was the source? How did he get to the first day? We're going to see later on in the daf that there are other opinions. There's some people who hold the second day. Some people hold the sixth day. And of course, Rabbi Shua holds the last day. We have different opinions on the matter. Belezer holds the first day of Sukkot to start saying Mashav Ruach. Okay? So if it's the first day of Sukkot, you start saying Mashav Ruach, the Gemara is asking, what's the source of that? How do I know? Gemara has two options. One option is Nisach Hamayim, one option is Arba Minim. Those are the two options of how potentially you can understand Mashav Ruach is said on the first day of Sukkot. But I think one wants to go more subtly than that. It's not just simply that I have two sources that could teach that Mashav Ruach is said on the first day of Sukkot, but they're actually going to be an afkamina as to when you could say it. The earliest time for saying Mashav Ruach, if you're learning it out from Lulav, is going to be by the day of Sukkot. Why? Because the Arba Minim is only a mitzvah by day. But Nisach Hamayim can actually be done not just by day. It can even be done at night. So if Nisach Hamayim can even be done at night, and if I'm learning at Mashav Ruach from Nisach Hamayim, maybe I would start saying Mashav Ruach even the first night of Sukkot. That's the Gemara until here. So the Gemara says that proof Tashma the Amar Rabbi Avo. We're going to come in here that what Rabbi Avo said, Loilam de Rabbi Lezer Ela Milulav. Rabbi Lezer, his real source for Mashav Ruach to be said on the first day of Sukkot, how did he know? He knew that from Lulav. That's the real source. Not Nisach Hamayim, it's really Lulav. Now, the Gemara is answering the question. In other words, the question is, so how do we know that we say Mashiv Harach on the first day of Sukkot? We have two options, either Lulav or Nitzach Hamayim. And the Gemara has further delineated the question. If I learn it out from Lulav, it would be the first day of Sukkot. If I learn from Nitzach Hamayim, it could even be the first night of Sukkot. And now the Gemara is saying, okay, we have Rabbi Vo. Rabbi Vo says it's learned out from Lulav. So by definition, if it's learned out from Lulav, then it answers 2 points. Number one, what was the source? The source of Mashiv Barach on the first day of Sukkot is Lulav. And second, we know now that it's only going to be by day. It's not going to be by night. If it's learned out by Lulav, the mitzvah of the Arab is only by day, right? So we will answer two birds with one stone, right? Essentially, by saying that it's learned out from Lulav, we know now what the source is for why it's the first day of Sukkot, and we know that it's the first day of Sukkot, not the first night of Sukkot. So now the Gemara says, "Ika de Amri Rabavo Gemara Gamirla, v'Ika de Amri Masnisa Shmiele." That is to say, this idea that Rabavo says the Mashiv Aruach Amar Geshem is learned out from Lulav to be done on the first day of Sukkot. Either he has some sort of a tradition, or he learned it out of a brisa. He learned it out from a brisa. Those are two options. The Gemara says, "My he." If we're saying that Rabavo learned it out of a brisa, that Mashiv Aruach is learned out from Lulav, that it's going to be now the first day of Sukkot. What is in fact this brisa that Rabavo learned, that he saw from there that the source for Abelezer must have been Lulav and not Nisach Hamayim? What is that? Says the Gemara. The time you have a brisa as follows. The brisa says, "Me'emas amaskirun ala geshamim." From when do you start being maskir and gesham? Right, very similar to how we opened up our Mishnah. Our Mishnah said, "Me'emas amaskirun geshamim." So if you look in this brisa, what do you first note? You note in this brisa, the emes amaskirun ala geshamim. Right, what was the Gemara's question on that base? The Gemara had a question on that base. Right, after the Gemara answered the first question of me'emasai tana heichakai. What was the Gemara's next question? The Gemara's next question was, "Belisni me'emasai amaskirun ala geshamim. My gevures geshamim. Why do we call it gevures geshamim?" So the Gemara was unsure, and we ended up a whole series of very complicated psukim to connect Geshem to Koyach and to Cheker and Gevura. It was mamish like, we said, Lamali cross, sorry, it's Pasha, open the door. What do I need? So, okay, we blibed Shver, we have that as a question. We're not sure the answer to that. But whatever the answer is, you see in this brisa what? What's this brisa saying? This brisa is saying, no, the lashon of this brisa is the Tanya me'emes hamaskirun ala geshamim. We're not here mentioning what? Gevuras geshamim. We don't mention it at all. Right? Is that clear? Yeah? Is that right? That's perfect. Good morning. So, you hear what I'm saying? You don't have to say Gevuras geshamim. You could simply say geshamim, and that will be sufficient. So put that on the side. I don't have an answer to the question, but you do see that sometimes Chazal did not always refer to it as Gevuras geshamim. Here you have an example of that. Okay. Nevertheless, again, the Gemara in Beis Aleph did therefore say that no, we always have to refer to as Gevuras geshamim because of the fact of all the lima from those psukim. Okay, fine. So the Gemara says the brisa that Rabbi Vo learned, that Rabbi Lezer holds of that the source for Mashiv Baruch to set on the first day of Sukkot is Lulav. How do I see it? It's this brisa over here. The Tanya. About 12, 13 lines down from the top. The Tanya, right? From when do you start saying Mashiv Aruach? You start saying it from the time that you start taking the lulav, meaning the day of Sukkot, the first day. That you start taking it from when? From the time you put down the lulav. When do you start putting down the lulav? You put down the lulav on the end of the Yantif of Sukkot. So Amar Belezner, so Belezner says to Rabbi Yeshua, Hayol v'arbas minin halolu einan bon alaratz telamayim. Since these four minim, and we'll learn more about this in Masechet Sukkah. But since the four minim, why the dal minim here? In order to be maratz on mayim, in order to be able to have a ritzoi from the Rebbeinu Shalom, to be able to have water. So if that's the whole basis of the dal minim. Just as you know, it's posh, you can't have the arba min without having water. So to the world, our earth cannot survive without water. We all know about the planet Earth. It's mostly water. I mean, water is the basis of our life. If not, we're mostly liquid, our bodies. If we don't have water, we're gone. So says Rabbi Yeshua that the Arab meaning are essentially to be Maratz on Mayim. They can only grow because of Mayim. So too, we should be saying Mashav Ruach on the first day of Sukkot because of what? Because of the fact that the world needs water as well. So it's a pretty open brisa that Ravo is seeing a connection between Mashav Ruach and the Arab Minim. And that's why you prefer that over Nisach Hamayim as the source for why you would be saying Mashav Ruach on the first day of Sukkot. So just to continue on the brisa, so Rabbi Yeshua responds to Rabbi Lezer. Rabbi Yeshua, like Yisham v'chag ene el siman klala. Right? Rabbi Yeshua says back, but like we saw in the Mishnah on base, he says, but to have Gisham in the middle of Sukkot, isn't that a terrible thing? Right? If somebody's going to have Geshem, we said yesterday, like the Gemara tells us in Sukkah, on Chavches, that it's like an Eved who came to pour water for the master, and the master throws the water back at him. It's a Simon Klala. So Rabbi Lezer responds the same way he responded in our Mishnah. Rabbi Lezer, I didn't say that we're asking for rain. We're not asking for rain on Sukkot. We're coming to be maskir, the power of the Rebbeinu Shalom to bring the rain. But we're not asking him to bring the rain on Sukkot itself. Okshem, and now Rabbi Lezer again waxes poetic, as we said again already in the Mishnah, to a degree. Rabbi Lezer over there defended himself by saying, Lo yamarti l'shal ela haskim asher baruch marna geshem ba'inasai. So now we explain it in even greater detail, and we say as follows: Zot the Gemara. In the same way that we have by Tchias HaMesim, we say Hashem's power, and it always applies. Says Rabbi Lezer, Amar Rabbi Lezer, Afani lo amarti l'shal ela haskir, Hashem shetchias HaMesim maskir, kol hashana kula ve'nei ela b'zmano. Just like we have no problem saying Tchias HaMesim a whole year long, even though when it's Tchias HaMesim, whenever Mashiach comes, it's not going to be before that, and yet we have no problem all year long saying Tchias HaMesim. So sotu kach maskim gvuras kasham kol hashana ve'nei ela b'zman. We can say Mashav Ruach a whole year long, even though we're only going to be relevant in the specific time that the rainy season is. We can still say Mashav Ruach because the Haskar is not a problem. We can say Haskar for Tchias HaMesim a whole year long. We can say Haskar for Gesham a whole year long. So according to Rabbi Lezer, you could say Mashav Ruach or Geshem a whole year long. It's no problem. We're not asking for rain during the wrong season. We're just being masked the power of the Rebbeinu Shalom, the same as the power of Mechai Mason, even though he doesn't do it except at its proper time. So too, we can be masked his power to bring the rain, even though he doesn't do it except even though we only want him to do it during the rainy season. So again, therefore if we would like to say Mashav Ruach a whole year long, it wouldn't be a problem. Rabbi Rabbi says no. Rabbi says that we don't say Mashav Ruach a whole year long. When we stop, this is the fact the halacha. When we stop saying she'ela, when we stop saying the same talamat of Racha, which we stop on Pesach, kach mafsik laskar. So too, we also stop saying the haskara, the Mashav Ruach Amor Geshem. We stop it then as well. So we'll stop over here for the moment and go through some of the Rashis and Tosfos. But that's the basic premise of the Gemara so far, right? Rabbi Lezer says they say Mashav Ruach on the first day of Sukkot. The Gemara wanted to know what was the source. The Gemara said the source could have been two things, either lulav or nisach hamayim. The Gemara further developed that and said, well, if it would be lulav, if it's the Arba meaning that he's learning it from, then it should come out that you say it only on the first day of Sukkot, because the first day of Sukkot is when you bring the Arba meaning, rishon. But if it would be nisach hamayim, it would not just be the first day of Sukkot. Potentially, it could even be mocked from saying Mashav Ruach for the first night of Sukkot, because nisach hamayim can be done even at night. And that the Gemara says there. Rabbi says that he has a tradition that I shouldn't say tradition, that's the wrong word. Rabbi says that Rabbi Lezer learns it out of Arba Minim. The Gemara says that Rabbi could either have meant that he had some sort of tradition, or because he had a brisa. The Gemara develops the idea of the brisa, and the brisa is clear that according to Rabbi Lezer, there is a very valid connection, a very strong connection between the haskara of Mashav Ruach and the mitzvah of the Dal Minim. That what? The same way that the Dalaminim are there to be reached Alamayim, The same way that the Dalaminim only grow with Mayim, so too the whole world needs Mayim. So this time when we're going to start having the mitzvah of Dalaminim, we'll start having that skara of Mashav Arach, which would be the first day of Sukkot. That's the Gemara until here. And we have, yes, Rabbi Shua disagrees. Rabbi Shua says it's a curse. You shouldn't be talking about it. But says it's not a curse. I'm not asking for rain. We're just being masked, the power of Hashem for rain. Same way we could say Tchias HaMesim a whole year long, even though Hashem only does Tchias HaMesim at the right time, Mashiach's Titan. So we can still say it. It's not a problem to say it. So do we can say Mashiach Ruach a whole year long. Rebbe and ultimately disagrees. Rebbe says no. You can only say Mashiach Ruach until Pesach, because once you stop saying Sheila, you should stop saying the bracha of the Haskar. I'm sorry, of Mashiach Ruach. That's the Gemara until here. Says Rashi. So we're at in the top of the wide second of the wide lines. So the Gemara says Milulav Gamar La. That one of the options for Abelaz was they learned that from Lulav. Shedema Lulav, because this was comparable to Lulav. How? Shekashem Sheyev Shala Elu Arbamina B'Loy Geshamim Ubayin Laratzis Alamayim. The same way that it's not possible for these 4 minim to grow without water, and they're coming to be maratza on water. Like them reading the sukkah, like we say in the Gemara, tells us in Sukkah Lamed Zayin. So Yev Shala Elu B'Loy Mayim. So therefore, it's not possible for the world to exist without water, and therefore that will be the source for Mashav Ruach being done the first day of Sukkot. Malulav Bayom Shemaschil until B'Yom Rishon. When do you start taking the lulav? You can tell us the lulav is the Yom Rishon. So Afaskar Nami B'Yom. So to the skar of Mashav Ruach will also be by day. Kloimar she'enon maskim b'leili antef Rishon ad lamach. You do not start saying Mashav Ruach at night. If you're learning out from lulav, you start only by day. But Nisach HaMayim, as the Gemara, as we said, further developed the idea Nisach HaMayim maybe applies even at night. So here we have 2 versions in Rashi. So man Nisach HaMayim, what do we mean when we say Nisach HaMayim can be at night? In the Ashram Mesachas Sukkah, Shem Mal and Akli Mayim Nisach HaMayim Bekli, because what you do is on the night of Sukkot, right? You start preparing the Nesachim, you start preparing the water, you fill up the pitchers at night. So what do we mean when we say Nisach HaMayim B'Layla? What is, according to this pshat, it's a bit of a dodge, but we're going to see why it has to be this way, right? What's the dodge? Nisach HaMayim is what? Preparing water, putting it in pitchers? No, that's not Nisach HaMayim. We know what Nisach HaMayim is. Nisach HaMayim is a water libation, right? You're going by the Mizbech and pouring water, not preparing water in pitchers. This version or this pshat of Rashi is bothered by a problem, as we're going to see in the second, we're going to see in Tosfos, is a problem here. So what we're trying to say is, on the one hand, it sounds like Nisach HaMayim can be done at night. On the other hand, we know Nisach HaMayim actually is not done at night. When do you do Nisach HaMayim? Or, let me be more clear, it's not done on the first night. In other words, when do you normally do Nisach HaMayim on a carbon? After the carbon, by definition, right? What's the main event? The main event is Nisach HaMayim, the main event is the carbon. First you have to do the carbon, then you do the Nisach. Not vice versa. The order is not correct. So yes, you can do Nisach HaMayim at night. Which night would that be? The second night of Sukkot. So according to this pshat of Rashi, the only way Nisach HaMayim is going to work on the first night, to explain the Gemara, because the Gemara is saying that it has to be the first day according to Rebbe Lezer. And if it's going to be when Nisach HaMayim, it could even be at night, meaning the first night. Well, then how could it be if Nisach HaMayim usually happens after the carbon? It must be then according to this pshat, they prepared the water. That's what we mean when we say Nisach HaMayim is done afilu me'orta. We don't mean the literal Nisach HaMayim. We mean the prep, right? The Hashem mitzvah is like the mitzvah. That's what we're referring to. That's this understanding of Rashi. Second understanding of Rashi is v'yeshvam t'chsebu d'amar marmin chastam v'skeim b'layla shemekriven ha'karbonos b'yayim yechoyin lahavi ha'minochet v'anasachim b'layla. Right, when you bring karbonos by day, so you could bring them in nachas and nesachim at night. So too, this Nisach HaMayim can also be done at night. This Rashi is somewhat eliding what we're going to see in Tosfos. Well, yes, when you bring the karbanos by day, you could bring the nesachim at night. But are we talking about the second night here or the first night? For Rebbe Lezer, it can only work if it's the first night. So this Rashi would then be saying that you're able to bring the nesachim before the carbon. And Rashi is using a lashon. Look carefully at the Rashi. Shemakriven hakarbanos b'yayim. If you're bringing the karbanos by day, yechon lavi ha'menachos v'anesachim b'layla. That sounds like we're talking about more than one carbon. We'll see Tosfos that's not true. There's only one carbon where you potentially could bring the Nisach HaMayim before the carbon. So these are some of the issues with this Rashi. But again, for our purposes now, the Gemara is telling us that Nisach HaMayim could start at night, the first night, which would then be a kontra blessing. When he says that you do the Masha Baruch on the first day of Sukkot, it would mean the first night of Sukkot itself. Continues the Rashis. So Afaskar Nami Me'orta. So you should start the Masha Baruch even at night. Shebeleli Yantif Arishan Kamar. We're talking about the first night of Yantif. Right? Shebeleli Yantif Arishan Kamar Beleza Shemaskil Haski. Where's Hashem? According to this, Beleza would hold. You start saying Masha Baruch on the first day of Sukkot. That's true, but the first day is really the first night. That's when you would start if you learned it out from the Nisach HaMayim. So again, we have two options for Mavo: either Gemara Gomer Law or Mavo. There are Beleza learned Lamdel Midlulav. Either we have some sort of tradition, the Beleza learned out of Lulav, or Masnis and Shemiyalai. So if you look at this Rashi, Masnisan, it's obviously not correct. You have to say Masnisa. In my Gemara, they have a dot about it, right? Because otherwise it'll be a Mishnah, which we're quoting here a Brisa. So we have a Masnisa, a Brisa. The Rabbi Lezer Gomer Lulav. We have a Brisa. Rabbi Lezer learned it out of Lulav. So again, as we've said before, that Rabbi Shua disagrees. Rabbi Shua says that you don't start on the first day of Sukkot, but rather Rabbi Shua Mishas Hanachasai, right? When you put down, not the Tila of the lulav, but the Hanach of the lulav, when you put the lulav down. Right? This it sort of intimates an understanding of the fact that people used to walk around the lulav and esrog all the time. They walked around it by the whole day, and so the Hanachasim is when you're finally putting it down for the last time that you're done. You're not taking it up again anymore. Now look at this Rashi carefully, and we're going to have to hold it in mind because we're going to see it a couple different places, and we're going to have to come up with as far what Rashi is saying here specifically. Mishas hanachase. What does it mean when you put down the lulav? Miyom shemevarchen by ba'achroina, the hainu b'shvi. That's the last day that you make the bracha of lulav, which is b'shvi. So what does that mean? Mishas hanachase, from when you put down the lulav, miyom, from the day shemevarchen by ba'achroina, that you make the bracha on the last time. The hainu b'shvi. So when is Rashi saying that you're taking the lulav? Do you see what I'm saying in this Rashi? Rashi saying mishas hanachasei miyayim shemavarchim by b'achrayna. When you start saying the bracha, when you start saying that skar mashav barach, from the day when you make the bracha of alantilas lulav the last time, which sounds like Hashanah Rabbah, right? Which sounds like the seventh day of Sukkot, right? Doesn't sound like we're talking here about Shmini Atzeres. When we said in the Mishnah on base, that according to Rabbi Shua, when do you do miyantav achron shel chag? It's the end, right? We weren't referring here chag as the literally sukkahs, but chag is the holiday, which includes the Yom Rishon and the Yom Shmini. We call all of it the chag, so we assume it was to Shmini Atzeres, which is how we do it. But what is this Rashi mashma? This Rashi is mashma that you're starting to say Mashav Baruch Miyam Shem Mevorchim Bei Bachron, the last day that you make the bracha of Netilas Lulav, which would be the Shvi, which would be the last day of Sukkot, which would be Hoshana Rabbah, what we call Hoshana Rabbah. Yeah. Okay. So the four meaning Shabluv Esrei, Kach Geshamim. So the rain is something that's able to be said a whole year long. Kach Geshamim Masik Hashana Afilu Masachama. You should even be able to mention Masik Mashav in the summer. In Horaitzi and Masik, you should be able to do it. Rabbi disagreed. Rabbi said, "Mishosha Pesach Milisha." Once you stop, Sheva Pesach Pesach Milam B'Sein Talam Matar. On Pesach you stop saying B'Sein Talam Matar. So Pesach Milahasker Givuras Geshamim. Right. So then you stop also saying Masha Varach. We don't mean literally at the same time, right? Because by Pesach, the first day of Yantif, you actually can't say B'Sein Talam Matar. We don't have we're only mentioning 7 brachas. Right? We're not doing a Shemon Esrei of 19 or 18 brachas, right? So you don't have the benediction of Baruch Aleinu. So if you don't have Baruch Aleinu, you can't say the same Talmud. So that's not the same time that you're stopping because you don't have the option to. But fundamentally, you would have stopped if you had it. And as we learned in brachas, right? We say that really be'etzem you could say the Yudches brachas on Shabbos and Yom Tov. Why don't we? We're not meant to the crowd, right? It's a very long davening. You don't have time to say 18 brachas. So we say we cut it down. But fundamentally, you could, in theory, imagine that being applicable. Fine. So it says Rashi, Mishosha Pesach Milishosha Pesach Pesach Milam Saint Talmud Pesach Milasking Rosh Hashanah. So when you stop saying Saint Talmud, you stop saying Mashav Ruach. The Hashaloi Motzes Lamem Mimbala Haskin Kol Hashanah Kula Masker. Now you're not able to say anymore that if you want to say it at any time of the year, you should be able to say it. Right? You can't say B'Mosachama. B'Mosachama ain't a Masker. Elvein is Manat. So you cannot say B'Mosachama because that's not the right time. After Chag, so to the first days of Sukkot, ain't it Masker? Hoyavolisim Bracho. So too, you won't be able to say it then because it's not considered to be a siman bracha. Fine. So Let's look at the Tosfos. The Tosfos over here says so Iboilu, the top Tosfos. So I want you to point out first. Look at the top Tosfos. The first line Tosfos says Pirish. Look at the second line Tosfos Pirish. Look at the Tosfos further down the page. Tosfos the Omar Rebavo. The next Tosfos down on the page. What does he say? How does he open up? Pirish. Look at the next page. Mishas. What does he say? Pirish. Right. The next page Mishah. He doesn't use the word Pirish, but that's exactly what he's doing. Look at the next page. Haiver. Pirish. And look at the next text, Mayim. It's another parish. All of these texts in here, except for in the middle of the Bailhu, are all what? Essentially going to say similar things to Rashi. As we pointed out from the Maratzias, that is a sign that this is not Rashi, because if it was, then Tesis wouldn't be doing exactly what Rashi said. He would be saying parish if he had to quote him at all to disagree, or he wouldn't be saying anything. Right? They did not have typing, and they didn't have printing. They were laconic in the extreme. They only wrote when they had a need to write, not like today. Yeah. So it says the Taisus, does he learn that from Lulav? My Lulav to perish. Will Lulav have a ritzu de mai? The God of mai, right? Or Dilma Nisach Gamarla, right? Or maybe he learns that from Nisach. Now, Taisus gives one reason here, but I'm going to skip this reason and jump to the Inami, the second reason of Taisus. So Taisus says a few lines down the narrow lines. Inami. The imi lulav gamal. What does it mean if you're learning it out from lulav? Dafka b'yoyim. Then you can only say mashavrach by day. Why? Because it says lokachim lechem b'yom harishayin. Avol minisach. If one from nisach afilu b'layla, then you can even say mashavrach on the first night of Sukkot. Well, then it's hani damamar minchasim v'skem b'layla. And that's what we mean when we say minchasim v'skem. It can be even done at night. Pirish. Even though Nisach Hamayim always happens after the carbon, then when you mean that you're able to take the Nisachim at night, it means that can only be done on the second night, by definition. So what do we mean that you learn from Nisach Hamayim that you say Rebbe Lezer is that's the Rebbe Lezer's source, and you say Mashiach then on the first night? What do we mean? The nisach on the chag, which would be from the mayim, which would be on the first night. How is that going to be? And even though we know that you don't do nisach hamayim on sukkahs except by the Taman Shal Shachar, meaning that would be by day, that would be the first carbon, that would be when you do it. So what are you talking about? If you learn from Nisach Hamayim can be after the carbon, meaning the second night. You're saying for Rebbe Lezer that Nisach Hamayim can be the source, I mean it'll be done the first night. How could it be? Says Tez Shloimar, the Einech Chayav LaNasech Ela B'Tam Shel Shachar Mikol Makam Yiboya Avad Le B'Layla. Says Tez, Epis, Efsher, maybe by the carbon tamid, you could bring the Nesachim at night. You don't have to. But maybe you could bring it before you actually bring the tamid itself. And therefore, that would be then the source for how, if you learned it out from Nisach Hamayim, then you start saying Masha Ruach the first night of Sukkot. But that sounds very different than Rashi. Look at Rashi again. What did Rashi say? In the Rashi, Man Nisach Hamayim Me'urta, right towards the end of Rashi, Shemakrivan HaKarbonos Bayayim, Yechoyel Nahavi HaMenachas VaNesachim Alayla. Really? It sounds like says that you're going to be limited to just potentially the carbon tamid. Right, the carbon tamid shal shachar on sukkahs. That's the only one where you can do the nisach hamayim at night. So it sounds like the lashon of Rashi of karbonis is a broader lashon. So I don't know exactly what Rashi means. Okay, Damar Ravo again, the same thing as you would expect. It's mamish like a Rashi. So he says that Ravo learned it out from Rebbe Lezer says that you say Masha Baruch on the first day of Sukkot. He learned it out from Lulav Pirish. And the Nisach then would be what do you call it? It would be only from the next day. And the Nisach then would not be working out. Why? Because the Nisach is only on the second day, right? I should say, the Nisach Hamayim can only be if you're learning out of Nisach Hamayim at night, it could only be on the second night. It would not be able to be on the first day. In other words, you could have Nisach Hamayim on the first day also, right? In other words, if you learned out from Lulav, it can only be the first day of Sukkot. If you learn from Nisach Hamayim also is the first day of Sukkot. Because for sure you're doing Nisach Hamayim on the first day of Sukkot. But in terms of saying that it would be a different time, that it would be at night, it would only be then the second night. In other words, Rabbi Vo is saying that it can only be from Lulav. There's no option of learning it out from Nisach HaMayim, because according to what Taisa is learning, according to Rabbi Vo, Nisach HaMayim can only start at night, which would be the second night, because the first night there wouldn't be any. That's where he wants to say Rabbi Vo, because Rabbi Vo holds that, Rabbi Lezer holds that, and I'm not sure why Taisa has to go all the way here, because it could have been that Rav Vo has a tradition about lulav just from this brisa and doesn't talk about nisach hamayim at all. So why Taisus has to say that the pirish is that Rav Vo is or Belezer is holding that nisach hamayim is not going to happen until the second day or the second night? I'm not sure why that's necessary. Could be it was the first day, but the better source was still from lulav, because lulav is what he actually connected it to when he said why he was disagreeing with Rabbi Shua. Why he was saying Mashav on the first day was because we want to learn that from Lulav, which is a reacher from Mayim, and we want to talk about Mayim. So I don't really understand Taisus why Taisus has to go all the way this far. No, I'm not sure. All right, next Taisus Mishas and Tilas Lulav, Pirish. Right, you learn it out from Tilas Lulav, the Hainu Tilas Yom Rishon. Right, that's the first day of Sukkot that you're starting to take the Lulav, the Abraminim. Rabbi Shua and Mishas Anachasif. When you put down, now look at the last words here of Taisus carefully. When do you put down the Lulav? Perish leurta de moitzai she'iri shel sukkot shemanicham es lulav. You put it down, and the night, right at the nighttime of the seventh day, that's when you put down the lulav. And what is Taisus trying to hint at? What does it sound like? If you're putting down the lulav at the late afternoon, going into the evening on the seventh day of Sukkot, so what's it mashma? What's Taisus trying to avoid? So he's trying to avoid the problem that we saw in Rashi. Rashi said Mishas Hanachasa was when it sounded like from when you stop saying when you stop saying the bracha of Mitzilas Lulav, which would be the actual seventh day of Sukkot itself. Then on Shana Rabbi you would say Mashav Ruach. So he's saying not on the day itself. Perish leurta the Motzei Shvi. It's on the night time of the seventh when you put down the lulav, which would mean that the first time you start to say Mashav Ruach is Shemini Atzeres at night. Good. We'll have to keep that in mind as we go along. Fine. Let's move on. Mishor Shemafsik and Lishof. From the time you stop asking, Rabbi said these days, and Tosfos just gives you a partial explanation. Same Talmud. Once you stop saying same Talmud, the person will ask him Geshem. Then you stop saying Mashav Ruach. Okay. However, if Neateva, I don't think we did that yet, so I'll have to do that soon. Okay, so we're back in the Gemara now. So the Gemara we just finished, Rabbi said that he thinks that you stop saying Mashav Ruach when you stop saying the same Talmud Bracha. Now we have a couple of other shittas as to when you start saying Mashav Ruach. Says more. Rabbi Huda says that when you start saying Mashav Ruach, you start saying it on the second day of Sukkot. Rabbi Kiva says you start saying it on the sixth day of Sukkot. You start saying the sixth day of Sukkot. Rabbi Yehuda says the name of Rabbi Shua. Notice that yesterday in the Mishnah on Beis, we also had Rabbi Yehuda. This time it wasn't the name of Rabbi Shua, but Rabbi Yehuda was saying something, right, which will be the Shita of Rabbi Shua. Nevertheless, didn't say Rabbi Yehuda was the name of Rabbi Shua. Here, we specifically say Rabbi Yehuda the name of Rabbi Shua. So Rabbi Yehuda is explaining. Rabbi Yehuda says the name of Rabbi Shua is as follows. When somebody goes up to daven on Shmini, let's just say the last day of the Chag. So ha'achmarin maskir, harishin and maskir. Who's the one who starts saying Mashav Ruach? The Baal Musaf, not the Baal Shachris. The Yontav Rishon Shal Pesach. When do you stop saying Mashav Ruach? You stop saying on the first day of Pesach. Harishin maskir. Right, just like what we saw in the Mishnah, the first guy, the Baal Shachris, is still going to say Mashav Ruach. Ha'achmarin and maskir. The last guy is not. The Baal Musaf is not going to say Mashav Ruach. Says the Gemara now. Or maybe we'll stop right here for a second and just do the Rashi and Tosfos. So it says Rashi Acham spells Fias Musaf, Rishon spells Fias Yetz, or Einay Maskir, Rav Shuvim Maskir, and then once you stop saying it on Pesach, then you're not going to say anymore, as we said, Mashav Ruach the rest of the year. Tosfos says the Overlif Neatev B'Yom Shalchag Acham Maskir. Right, a person who is getting up at the end of Yontif to say Mashav Ruach is going to be the Baal Musaf, not the Baal Shachar. Says it's Pirish. Ha'akam shem mishpal tefillas Musaf. Rishon ain't a masker. Pirish shem mishpal tefillas Shachars. Ain't a masker. The one who's davening Shachar is not going to be saying Mashav Ruach. Ubi Yerushalmi Kamar, and the Yerushalmi it says Amay ain't a masker. me'orta perish mitfilas arbis. And Rishalmi asks, why do you start saying Mashav Ruach from the night before? Again, we already talked about that from the night before in terms of Nitzach Hamayim, and that's not the source, so we know why it can't be from the night before. We go with Lulav, that's only by the day. But the Rishalmi asks, why don't we say Mashav Ruach from the night before? And the Rishalmi's answer is, Umashad, less Tamon Kalama, because there's not a lot of people there by Ma'ariv. You're going to have a bigger crowd by day. So we don't want to start saying Mashav Ruach by night. Says the Gemara, Udaku b'tzafra. So then start saying Mashav Ruach by Shachris. Says the Rishalmi, no, we can't. Perish Shachris. And the Rishalmi answers, Mishana to have a sphere to have a matkule me'orto. And the Rishalmi answers, no, because that would be a problem, because people would then think that we start saying it at night. I just want to point out this, that this is a very practical way of learning why you don't want to say Mashav Ruach. Not Mashav Ruach because we don't have Nitzach Hamayim. No, we don't have Mashav Ruach because we don't have people in shul. And what does this remind us of? The Gemara Shana Lamed Beis. Gemara Shana Lamed Beis tells us about what? About why don't we blow shofar? Huh? That is very good. That is part of the Gemara there, but it's not this Gemara I'm referring to now. The Gemara over there says that you blow shofar by Musaf. So the Gemara says, you're talking about a Gemara in Rosh Hashanah Tezayin. I'm talking about a Gemara Rosh Hashanah Lamed Beis. So the Gemara says in Rosh Hashanah Lamed Beis, why don't we say that we blow shofar by Shachris? Because we use Magdim mitzvahs. So the Gemara says, no, we can't. Oh, we can't do it because it's true there's Magdim mitzvahs, but there's also V'Ravam Hadus Melech, and there's no people in Shul Shachris. So therefore we do it by Musaf. Look at this text over here. I have a question on the Rishalmi. What's my question on the Rishalmi? You said that why do you understand Mashav Ruach at night? Because no people. I understand. No people, you don't understand Mashav Ruach. But say, that makes sense to me. But why don't you start it by Shachas? Because people are going to remember that it was because people are going to think that was at night, they can make a mistake. And when do you start saying it? So say Pashu. There's nobody there at night. And there's nobody there by day either. So if there's nobody there by day, that's why you can't mention it. And even enough to see they want to say, no, you don't want to do it by day because of the fact that the people are going to think that it was at night. So what if they think it's at night? What's the problem? They didn't come to daven. So what? All right, we have to leave it on that. All right, so we have to do the next quick couple of lines. So it says the Gemara, we left it off by saying, so the Gemara says, Shabbat Rabbi Lezer Bishur. Rabbi Lezer had a good response to Rabbi Shua. He explained a good connection to Rabbi Shua why you should start saying Mashav Ruach on the first day of Sukkot. I'm like Rabbi Shua. Rabbi Shua is going to respond. Bishlam Tchias HaMesim asking to Kol Yom Zmanehu. I understand why you say Tchias HaMesim, why you say it all year long. Why? Because it's always the time for Mashiach. We're Mashiach now. It's not like it's ever the wrong time. It's always the right time. You're going to say that's always the right time for rain? But we learn, the Mishnah tells us, right? When Nisan leaves and rain falls, it's bad. By the pasuk by Shmuel, he's going to bring the rain in the middle of the spring and the summer months, and it's going to be a bad sign. It's going to be a sign of a klal that Hashem is angry at you for asking for a king. So this is Rabbi Shua's response to Rabbi Lezer. Rabbi Huda Sarah says that he learned it out on the second day of Sukkot. That's when you start saying Mashav Ruach. Rabbi Huda Sarah, my time is Rabbi Huda Sarah. What's his reason? The time of Huda Sarah, if you look in the end of Parashat Pinchas, it says V'niskayem. Right, normally it says V'niska. Here it says V'niskayem. And the sixth day it says V'niskayem. That's also different. Normally it says V'niska. And the seventh day of Sukkot it says Kimishbatam, and normally it says Kimishbat. So these are all extra. Which words are extra? The first day, the Niskayim, instead of Veniska, the Mem is extra. The Ve'un Sacher, as the Rebbeinu Chananel explains, it should have Veniska, so the Yud is extra. And then it says Kimishbat, and normally it says Kimishbat, so the Mem is extra. Hare kan Mayim. Mem Yud Mem is Mayim. Mikan Rem is Nisach Mayim Menatzayra. That's the Rem is Nisach Mayim is Menatzayra. Very nice. Umayshna b'sheni denokat. So what does that do with the second day of Sukkot? The Cheremizi a little bit crow, because the first time you see something different is b'sheni hu deremizi. You see it on the second day that uses a bit of an odd lashon. So therefore, on the second day, we are going to be mentioning Mashav Haruach. We don't have a lot of time, so just quickly mention that the Taisus explains Mayim is the last Taisus is Mem Miniskem, the Siv B'Sheni V'Yud, the Siv B'Shishi, Unsacher, right as we explained, Umem Shabashrik Sikkim Mishpatam, V'Havim Mayim. And that is the reason of Mayim. That's why we say Nisach Mayim Minatayr, contributing to Sarah, but the real reason for why he says the second day of Sukkot is because of the fact that the first change or alteration is you see on the second day. So therefore, we go with the second day since that hint is from Mayim, from these alterations. So therefore, we start with saying Mashiach on the second day. All right, Nishkar.